good. Hello to what feels like quite a surreal event, actually. Real people. Bloody hell, look at you all. And not only that, but we've got a whole virtual crowd watching as well. So these cameras you may see are picking up dozens of people who are watching from all over certainly the UK. I think there's one or two in Europe as well. So it's such an honour to have you all. Hello, you. I hope. My name is Ben. I own our bookshop next door to this venue. It's an honour to be hosting one of the earliest hybrid events that are going on at the moment, and it's a sort of sign that the world is opening back up, which is wonderful news to everyone. And hopefully we'll have a schedule of more and more physical events, which will always be offered as a hybrid. A hybrid offering as well throughout. So, but it's an honour to be involved in what is quite a novel idea. We did do one last year, which was hugely successful, and those of you who came to Stuart Turton's event will be testament to that. So, but anyway, without further ado, and I'm sure you're keen to get our author and Harriet out. Without further ado, can I introduce Harriet Queralt and Stacey Halls.
Oh, sorry. Oh. There we go. I think we had the opposite chairs last night, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
But,
I'll have it.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben. And hello, and thank you to everyone for coming along tonight. It's so brilliant to have these live events happening again, and a massive welcome to Stacey as well, who we realised was last here in February 2020, which at the time didn't really seem a very unusual time, but it kind of was, wasn't it then? So many of you, I'm sure, have enjoyed The Familiars, which was Stacey's first novel. And that was the tale of 17-year-old Fleetwood Shuttleworth, who gets drawn into the Lancashire witch trials when she meets the midwife, Alice Gray. And then Stacey was here to launch The Foundling last February, this time set in the 18th century, but still very much centred on the experiences of women. So yeah, Stacey, February 2020, it was part of your book tour. So yeah. How did it go? Did you manage to complete it before lockdown?
Oh yeah, it was the last time I had fun, basically. Yeah, we did like a full 2 weeks of events and bookshops and signings, and it was just like the usual whirlwind. But I absolutely love doing that because it's a lonely job being an author. You know, you're at home all the time. You don't have colleagues. Yeah. You don't speak to that many people. So my poor long-suffering husband is pretty much the only person who gets to speak to me most days. But so that's why I love coming out and doing the tours, because it's the only time I get to speak to people.
Yeah. And I mean, the book did really well. Do you think kind of lockdown, did it mean people were reading more? Do you think?
I'm not sure, but I've heard that books are sort of selling more than ever, which is of course absolutely amazing. Yeah. I've definitely, I don't know, I've been a bit mixed. Like I've found that my concentration has really sort of dipped at times throughout the past year, and I've just not been able to sort of persevere with books that I know I'm going to like. I just don't have the attention span. But then sometimes I'll read like 3 books in a week. So it's still sort of like that.
Yeah, same here, definitely. So we had The Familiars set in the time of the witch trials. We then had the Foundling in the 18th century. So you've moved on in time. And Stacey's here tonight, and it is publication day today for her brilliant new novel, Mrs. England. And this is now set in the very early 20th century. I think it's 1904.
1904, so very modern for me, because they had, cameras and telephones and cars and all these amazing things that it felt like I was writing a contemporary novel, to be honest.
Brilliant. So I don't know how many people, I think some of you have just got your books. How many people, anyone finished it or started it? Or? Yeah, I know some people have started it and some people finished it. But yeah, several of us have read it all.
But we'll try and keep it spoiler free.
Absolutely, totally. I mean, you know, not to give anything away, it's basically about a young Norland nanny who goes to work for this mill-owning family called the Englands in Yorkshire. So without spoiling the story, can you give us a little bit of a taster and tell us what we've got in store?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's set in the Edwardian period, and it's about a young nurse called Ruby. She's 20 years old. She's trained as a Norland nurse. So for anyone who isn't familiar with the Norland Nanny School or Norland College, it's the sort of creme de la creme of childcare training, and has been since the late 19th century when it was founded. So Ruby is a trained Norland nurse. She takes a job with the England family in West Yorkshire, the wilds of West Yorkshire. She's very much a city girl. She's from Birmingham. And the children are lovely. She's immediately drawn towards the husband, Mr. England, who's very generous and vivacious. And she just instantly feels like there's something a bit off about his wife, the mother of the children. She's quite distant. She's quite withdrawn. And at the same time, events from Ruby's own past are sort of rearing their ugly head. So she's having to contend with that at the same time as trying to figure out what's going on in Hardcastle House.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I know your previous novels were very much based on kind of real events and characters. So what about this one? Are the Englands, real people? Does Hardcastle House exist?
No, so this was the most fictional book I've written in terms of, The Foundling was, although all the characters in The Foundling weren't based on real people, the institution of the Foundling Hospital was very much the germ of the idea and was a real place and really sort of functioned in that way. And I just sort of made up a story based on that. That's where I got my inspiration from. But with this one, so it was the setting that came to me first. So I'm from Lancashire, very close to the Yorkshire border. And quite a few years ago, for a long time ago, we started going on walks around the Hardcastle Crags area, which is just outside Hebden Bridge, which probably means nothing to you if you haven't been there, but it's such a specific place in terms of its like atmosphere, and I just get a really amazing feeling going there. So it's a sort of a wooded valley with a river running through it, and there's it's a good couple of miles from the village, from the town, and there's this really sort of quite secretive mill on the river, just in this sort of glade that just opens up and appears out of nowhere, and it's an early industrial revolution mill, like very early 1800s. So it's kind of this like chocolate box, perfect looking place, and I just kind of wanted to write a story set in that place because it's so secretive, it's so private, so isolated. You really do feel quite cut off with all the trees and the valley really closing in. So that was sort of stirring in my mind. And then I thought, I have to make up a story now about this place, which you probably think, you're a writer, that's what you do. But I don't I feel like I don't. I sort of thought for quite a long time about what I could set there. And at the same time, I had the urge to write about something to do with Edwardian childhood, nannies, children's nurses, that kind of golden era of childhood that we associate with, Mary Poppins, Peter Pan, Railway Children, Secret Garden, that kind of image of perfection, the gaslit nurseries, the pinafores, the presence of the nanny, this idyllic childhood. I kind of wanted to explore that and maybe write something with a bit of a dark edge to it. So I sort of brought those two things together and thought that the fictional Hardcastle House would be the perfect setting for that. So there is a strand of it that is based on a real or two real people, but I couldn't possibly say what because it would give too much away. But this is the most fictional book I feel like I've written. Yeah.
So you made up Hardcastle House because of Hardcastle Crags.
Yes.
And the mill, there is a mill there.
Yeah. So
did you find out about the mill and what it had been used for?
Yeah, it was. West Yorkshire was used mainly for wool production in the textile industry, industrial revolution, and then I was interested in sort of setting, because the boom of the textile industry is what Lancashire and particularly the Northwest was most rich for, is most known for, and is famous for, was worldwide famous for it, and made an awful lot of money for the UK. And it was definitely, I wanted to kind of explore that at its decline as well. So the years of boom are very much over, like a good couple of decades over, and it's sort of fallen into, you know, where they were making millions and millions is now all the trade is being outsourced. So that was another, I mean, this probably sounds super boring, but I think because I'm from the area, I was genuinely interested in the history of, and the texture of where I'm from. And there was this amazing quote from, I think it was from like a cabinet minister in the Victorian era, who said something like, the wealth of the empire, like the total wealth of the empire, is thanks to 300,000 little girls in Lancashire. And I just love that, because they have just, you know, evaporated in history. But actually, we're such a rich country because of these child labourers.
Wow. And I think you said last time you were here, because you had lived in London and you were moving up to Yorkshire to write the novel.
I lived in the place to write it. So I moved to just outside Hardcastle House, because it's actually a National Trust area now. Can't live in it. But I moved to a little house on my own, just on the edge of it, because I felt like I really wanted to, because I'd written 2 books in London by that point, and I was working full time when I wrote both of those books, The Familiars and The Foundling. So I only actually quit my job to write full time for this book. So this is the first book I've written where I'm a full-time author. And I thought, well, what's the best bit about that? Being able to go and work where you want. So I asked my husband if he'd mind if I moved out for 3 months. And I moved 200 miles away to West Yorkshire to write the book. Because I really wanted to be in the place, and I wanted to not rely on being in the place to transmit that into the work, but I wanted to, you know, it might sound a bit weird, but like touch the moss and see how the light moved in the woods, and really feel that sense of like isolation and almost like abandonment of life. Like I did sort of leave my life for a little bit and check out, which is very much what Ruby has chosen to do. So it was an amazing experience. I absolutely loved it, and still want to move there, but we're not allowed.
But yeah, I mean, I think the sense of place, you know, really is very strong. So, and you honestly think you wouldn't have got that if you'd been writing down south?
I mean, I would like to think so, but probably not. No, no. Yeah, it is my absolute favorite place, and the house that I rented, it was sort of. The houses are so interesting there because it's so steep. The valley is so steep. The houses are built into it, so they're actually built on top of each other. So one person's front door is here, and in the same house, another person's front door in a different house it's all one building, but their front door's down here. So they're sort of stacked on top of each other. And the roads go, sorry, I keep hitting the mic. The roads go up and up the valley, higher and higher, steeper and steeper. And I just had this amazing view over the whole valley. And the Yorkshire weather is very distracting to look at.
And did you ever get sort of scared being in that isolated? Because there's certain bits of the novel where, you know, Ruby is on her own and it's quite tense and scary. Like, did you experience that as well?
Yeah, I'm a total wimp, and I moved for some reason. I decided I needed to live in a big house so that people could stay with me, which they did, so it was worth it. But like, the house was like, I think 5 bedrooms, but 2 of them were locked. So I had like 3, I lived in this big Victorian sort of house, and the first night there, I just thought, what have I done? Like, I am terrified, because it was January and all the windows were shut, but because it's Yorkshire and it's so wuthering, as famous, all the doors were like bumping and bouncing and I literally don't think I slept for probably the first 3 nights.
I don't think I could have done that. Oh, that's amazing. Well, it's been described as simmering with slow burning menace, which I think it really is. I think people would agree if they've read it. And also an enthralling story of men and women, power and control, courage, truth, and the very darkest deception. So although it's a very different period to your previous novels, there's definitely similar themes there, like men and women and power and control and that kind of thing. Was that sort of intentional? Are those themes really important to you?
I wouldn't say that it's intentional, but it seems to be what I'm drawn to writing. So each idea for my book seems to involve two women kind of from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
And I just sort of want to throw them together and see what happens. So that seems to be my tried and tested recipe. And I just think there's so many combinations that can come out that I'll probably endlessly write that combination of plot. But yeah, I guess so. I think that seems to be what I'm drawn to, and I think that with this one, it was sort of the slow, like the mention of slow burning. It's a lot slower and less fast paced and plot driven than my other two novels, and that was definitely purposeful because I wanted to sort of try something new, but also because the setting was this isolated house, you couldn't have everyone going here and there and people coming in and out. It needed to be this almost like what's the word, like a simmering, what's the word when you like lock a pan, you know what I mean?
A pressure cooker.
Yeah. I almost want it to be this like pressure cooker of sort of what is going on, the ground constantly shifting, you don't know who to trust, you don't know what's going on. Ruby as well, her position in the house was quite purposeful because I was particularly drawn to writing from the point of view of a nanny, or a nurse as they were called then, children's nurse, because I just thought it was such a unique viewpoint into a family dynamic and also into the servant dynamic, because it's this really weird position where you're not a servant but you're not part of the family, so you kind of exist in this weird in between where you don't really have any allies. However, you're privy to conversations that happen in the house. You're actually invited into the family rooms where servants wouldn't be. You sort of have to blend in but have this position of authority at the same time. So it's a really, really quite delicate, fragile, but like very interesting position to write from. So that particular viewpoint appealed to me. And yeah, I wanted it to be this sort of atmosphere. I wanted to create an atmosphere where you were sort of where you're sort of constantly looking over your shoulder and second guessing everyone, because you don't have any friends in the servants, and actually Ruby is quite lonely in the house.
Oh, you feel really sorry for her, actually.
Oh,
yeah. And what about the Norland Institute? Like, did you go and visit that? Did you do with the I can't remember her name, but the lady that set it up? Is she real?
Oh, Mrs. Ward. Yes, she's real. So Mrs. Ward, I mean, she briefly appears in I think one scene, doesn't speak, but she really set up the Norland College. So I wanted to write when I decided that the main character, that Ruby would be a nanny. I was drawn to write in about Norland nannies just because the institution itself fascinated me, and I think I do quite like to. Although I'm a novelist, I do like to ground my stories in some sort of institution or fact or timeline or event. Like, otherwise I feel a bit untethered. I quite like to use real things to tether myself within the story. And although Ruby May is fictional, the Norland College just fascinated me because it really is the sort of creme de la creme of nanny school. So it was founded in the late 19th century by a businesswoman actually called Emily Ward, who saw the opportunity to give women a childcare qualification. There was no qualification, even though nannies and nursemaids had been around for centuries. There was no sort of formal training. You could just sort of decide to be a nanny and go off and work and be a nanny. There was no formal training, there was no qualification. So she saw a gap in the market and set up this quite prestigious school. So it was very, very strict, very regimented. The uniform became famous and still is famous. And I was just really drawn to that because I felt like, I don't know, it interested me because maybe it's something that I would have liked to think that if I'd been born 100 years before, maybe I would have gone off and been a Norland nanny. Because there's just something so, like I was saying about the Edwardian childhood, like just something so neat and like perfect about it, where you have this, because also I wanted Ruby to be, so she's sort of cut off from her family and, she's trying to escape something. but she's still tethered in this world of Norland. So like it's the college, it's the agency she feels like anchored. It's the kind of, it's her family, if you will. Definitely. It's where she feels safe and comfortable, and she's really good at her job. And I just found it such an interesting place. Like you can just imagine like the image of the nannies in Kensington Gardens with the big old-fashioned perambulators and the pinafores and the hats, and lots of little things I found out in my research that I wanted to put in there, like the fact that, you know, they wore pink dresses to clean in the morning, and they were forbidden from letting their children, their charges, mix with the children of tradespeople and labourers, because that was not okay. They weren't allowed to cut their hair beyond a certain length. They weren't allowed to smoke. They weren't allowed to eat in front of people. They weren't allowed to eat with the servants. And Mrs. Ward encouraged them to buy silver hairbrushes and leave them very purposefully out on the dressers to prove to the servants that they were from this higher social standing. So it's very like the status of it intrigued me, even though in the early days they were very much middle class girls going to train there, because the fees were quite expensive. So I think the fees were £34 for about 6 months training, but the average annual salary of a nurse was 26. So it's a considerable amount. But they, you know, it was quite a revolutionary place in that Mrs. Ward quite soon saw the appeal of having nurses come from different backgrounds. So she set up a scholarship. She introduced the maiden scheme. So if you couldn't afford the tuition fees, you could work as a maid at the college, literally like serving food to the students and cleaning their rooms and stuff for a year, and then you get reduced fees at the end of that year. And while you did that, you would go under an alias, so you weren't embarrassed when you began to start training there. So they'd changed their names. So I quite liked that. And then slowly the intake changed to be mainly the daughters of like agricultural workers and farmers' daughters. So I thought that was interesting how it sort of changed from this like middle class world into being very much a place of opportunity for working class women like Ruby.
Definitely. And, you know, it was interesting the way that, like you said, it was very strict, and the people running it, you know, they're very high standards, but there was sort of compassion there as well, wasn't there, for Ruby? And, you know, they definitely looked after her. And
they looked after their girls, and they sort of, once you're a Norland, and I think this is still the case with Norland nurse nannies, once you're a Norland nanny, you're a Norland nanny for life. Like, you very much have this long-lasting relationship with the college, which I think is really nice.
So did any sort of particular reading feed into the novel as well as sort of research? Like, I can see parallels with things like Rebecca or Jane Eyre, you know, the sort of Gothic kind of...
I mean, they're my favourite books. So, yeah, I guess every attempt, I feel like every author sort of writes what they like to read, or tries to write what they like to read. Maybe tries to, I feel like I'm maybe trying to like not emulate them, but you're drawn to particular stories for a reason, so therefore it makes sense that you write in that sort of, not style, but trying to catch something from those, trying to do something like that. So yeah, Rebecca was a huge inspiration. My Cousin Rachel, which is, I think, my favourite du Maurier book, because I love the ambiguity in that. All the way through, you're wondering if Rachel is simply good or bad, and if she's who she says she is. And that is sort of something that I was trying to do with Mrs. England in a way. Yeah.
And I think that sort of sense of isolation as well, like Rebecca, you know, the way she's treated by, you know, the housekeeper, and definitely that sort of difficulty of arriving at a new house and not being welcomed and having to... And I didn't want to go too much down the Jane Eyre route, because I didn't want it to turn into like the classic the nanny has an affair with the husband trope, or the mad woman in the attic idea. Interesting. But I suppose, talking of Gothic, I was reading an article recently, and it said there'd been a real surge in both people writing kind of Gothic fiction, but also interest in reading it, to sort of reflect the times we've been living in. I don't know if you think there's any truth in that.
Oh gosh, I don't know. I suppose that if you're writing Gothic fiction, it's not going to be out for a while yet. So, I mean, like if you're writing it off the back of the pandemic, I don't know. I can only.
I think it was the sense of like, I don't know, being imprisoned and, you know, that kind of idea that's very Gothic.
Yeah, probably that. Like I had sort of been living in lockdown, my own private lockdown before the pandemic started. So I started writing this in last January, and I finished, and I think as everything was sort of the first draft, I mean, as everything was sort of starting to, as the world was starting to shut down, which if you'd have asked me at the time, if you'd have said to me at the time, the whole world will shut down, you can't go anywhere, you can't leave your house, I'd think, great, I'll write the best novel ever. This is the perfect list of ingredients that I need, but it was so hard. Because how I write novels is I write it and then I rewrite it and then I rewrite it probably like 4 or 5 times from scratch. So I would have, on paper, all the set of circumstances that the last 12 months have thrown at us is the perfect, you know, on paper, but without any of normal life, like any of the distractions or just the normal things that boost your energy, like seeing people and going to new places and having conversations with strangers, going to museums, whatever. Without any of that, when your work is like all you have going on, it's really quite intense, and I think you really do need that space from it that you aren't able, that I wasn't able to have any space away from it, so I just couldn't sort of really see the wood for the trees at some points.
Yeah, but maybe that added to the, you know, the idea of
I think it definitely made me go a bit mad writing it. Yeah. Which has probably come across in the book. Yeah.
And did you do any more writing during lockdown or no? So have you got...
I was working on this until until the day it had to go to print. But I'm very like, I do change quite a lot in each draft. Like it definitely evolves. It's not just like I write one draft and then it stays mostly that way and I change a few bits here and there. I really sort of like take it apart, put it back together again, take it apart, put it back together again.
Oh, really?
And there was actually something that I added in the very final draft about 2 days before it went to print that sort of tipped something completely over.
Is that the ending?
The very, very end, yeah. And I said to my editor, Sophie, I've just had an idea to put these 2 or 3 lines in. And she was like, okay, let's do it. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm very much a let's work until the wire.
Yeah.
The first draft is, I would absolutely hate for that to be seen by anyone. I'm not someone who is ever happy with the first, even second draft. Yeah.
But hopefully you're very happy with the final novel.
I mean, I don't think any writer ever is, but it's as close to, usually draft 4 or 5 for me is, that's when for me I get it to be in what I initially wanted it to be or what I hoped to write. That's as close as that's the closest it is to be in that. Yeah.
So when we last spoke to you, you were launching Familiars, but you already had your idea and you'd started writing. Sorry, it was The Foundling, but you'd already started writing Mrs. England. So have you got your next idea?
I have got my next idea, yeah.
Are you moving there?
I wish, because it's partly going to be set in Australia. So maybe I just pick places based on where I want to live. What do you think about that, Andy? I haven't started writing that one yet. No. I'm just taking a bit of time off because 3 books in, it's not even 3 books in 3 years, it's been 3 books in more like 27 months. It's just over 2 years. So I feel like, I don't know, the past year has just made me want to just like have a bit of a breather.
Yeah, definitely. Now you can actually get out and see people and so are you allowed to, is it historical again? Are you allowed to tell us this? It is. And going back again in time, or you're not allowed to tell us?
It's back from 1904 but forward from 1749.
Okay. So
I'll leave that for you to do a raffle maybe, or
we look forward to reading that. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the title, but again, I don't want you to sort of give too much away because it's called Mrs. England, but really most of the novel is more about Ruby, and then we discover more about Mrs. England, don't we?
Yes, we do. And I think the title came to me really early, I think when I started the research process. And like you mentioned about Rebecca, My Cousin Rachel, Jane Eyre, I was very drawn to naming it after a woman, like a name. And I was looking for a name because I knew it had to be quite impactful. And I came across, I can't remember how I came across the surname England, but you know, when something just clicks for you and you're like, yeah, that's it, the title's going to be Mrs. England. And I went and looked at because I need to know everything about everything. I went and looked into the surname England, and by that point I already had the setting. I knew that it would be the house by this river with the mill at the bottom of the drive, sort of thing, in this wood. And the name England originates from Yorkshire and means secret place next to a rushing river.
Wow.
So I was like, well, I'm a genius. I'm telepathic. So that definitely just nailed it onto the wall for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, and also with the sense of, I just wanted to be this sense of like mystique around her, because you can never quite get under her skin. I wanted Ruby to very much not feel like she understands her or knows her at all. So that she's sort of the eponymous character, yeah.
But I loved the way that, I think it's really clever that it's called Mrs. England and you're thinking why, but you really do get to know her by the end, don't you?
Yeah.
Which I thought was great. Yeah.
Yeah. Or do you?
well, yeah. And I was also going to ask you, what else, you talked about Rebecca and Jane Eyre being your favourite novels. What have you had any time to read lately? What do you like reading? Would you recommend anything to us?
I'm reading quite a lot of non-fiction at the moment, which I sort of tend to go in waves. I just read, this is quite random, nothing to do with anything like what I write, but a book came out about 10 years ago called Londoners by Craig Taylor, where he just sort of takes, he sort of transcribes interviews with loads of different people who live in London or work in London or have left London or were born there. And he's just done one called New Yorkers, which is the same thing, which I loved and read that in like 24 hours. What else have I read coming out? I do keep a list, but I keep a list because I just forget what I've read.
Same here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the one I finished last, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been struggling actually to read in the past couple of months. Like I looked at my app where I log everything, and I just didn't read anything in May, which is really not like me. And I've read 3 books in June already, but can't remember 2 of them.
Yeah. Oh, I'm absolutely the same. Yeah, I have to write it all down.
Yeah.
I cannot remember anything.
Yeah.
But well, that one sounds great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for giving us a bit of a sort of insight into the novel. I'm sure people have got questions. Ben, do you want to do online questions? Or?
Yeah, I've got a few have come in already. But the rest of the audience, put your hand up. I've got a roving mic in the sort of traditional format of a book event. So do if you've got questions. And from history, the physical audience are always very shy. So we will cheer anyone who decides to put their hands up. Maybe we shouldn't, because that will embarrass them. Right, so first question came from Laura Taylor. Hi, Stacey. Your talk's been brilliant. I'm actually from Albury, just down the road from here, a little village near Tring. Check it out if you're there for a few days. I'm gutted I can't be there in person. How do you balance research and writing? She's writing a fantasy novel, and one of the settings is in the Edwardian period.
Oh, okay. Thank you for your question. Yeah, that is the kind of the $1 million question, because I feel like it is a tricky balance. Obviously, research is absolutely necessary when you're writing historical fiction, but then there's the danger of doing too much, or you just get to the point where you're procrastinating then. So for me, I usually like to break down the story, or sort of areas or themes of the story that I can then go and research into. So like with this novel, I read up on Norland College, sort of like the Edwardian era generally, domestic servants, London at that time, the textile industry in the north, childhood, like sort of natural remedies, that the kind of things that would make it, what you're looking for is authenticity, I think, and a sense of atmosphere. And I think that it's sometimes as well, I like to go with a good idea of what's going to happen in the story, but I don't feel like I need to know exactly everything that's going to happen, because research definitely does throw up ideas as well. So I like to sort of go quite open-minded and just make loads and loads of notes under the sort of titles of the books that I've read. So my usual method is to go to the British Library and to take out as many books as I can on each topic or subject. And then I'll sort of just absorb it and stay sort of open to anything that might come my way ideas-wise, for like detail. And usually I spend a couple of months doing that, not much longer than that, which might sound like not a lot of time to some people. But by that point, I think when I'm getting to the point where I'm like itching to start, so I don't start writing until I have begun, until I feel like I've researched quite generally and widely, and have enough information for it to feel authentic. Because I think it doesn't have to be, of course, it has to be accurate in the sense that you can't have something completely anachronistic like that anyone would spot. But don't be afraid, don't feel like you have to know absolutely everything about a period or how people would have lived before you can start, because you will never know that. Like, you're not a historian, it's people's life's work. So yeah, just for me, it's usually a tipping point at about 2 months where I start to feel quite itchy, like I just want to start then. That tends to be how I do it.
Still nothing from the floor.
Oh, we have.
We have.
Oh, we
Peter,
have.
thank you.
When you've been talking this evening, you talked about what your intention were and what you were aiming to achieve, and how much of that is before you start writing, and how much of that kind of comes to you as you're writing and it's all developing and you're like, oh no, and I want it to do this now and I want to do that. How much of that is already in place and how much is kind of like happens whilst you're writing?
That's a good question. I guess it is a bit of both. I think you can have a hope for what the book will be and have an aim for what you're hoping to do, have an aim. But then, of course, you don't always know how it's going to go until you start writing it. So I sort of tend to have a bit of a roadmap. So I know sort of what happens roughly in each chapter, but we'll just plan like a sentence about each chapter. So I won't do a chapter outline or even like a story outline. I'll just sort of have it all in my head, and then I'll write down almost like scenes and lay them all out in front of me, pin them to the wall, whatever. And that way I can see the book from beginning to end, and that's really helpful for me because it becomes this visual thing that's not just this like, you know, concept of 100,000 words in my head. It really helps me to see it, and I can then spot if something should move or how the atmosphere or how something needs to build, the tension needs to build, if backstory needs, like I'll make all these sort of notes on the cards. And as well, this might sound quite random, but I actually use Pinterest quite a lot when I'm planning a book. So I will pin like book jackets of books that I sort of would align it with. So this one was, I pinned quite a lot of images, not just book jackets, but like film stills from not just the Edwardian period, but like Picnic at Hanging Rock, The Go-Between, The Virgin Suicides, all these kind of like dreamy, summery, very early 20th century set novels, and like pictures of light and shade, and like very much to try and set the mood and the tone of the book. And I just try and sort of stick to that mood throughout. I don't know if that makes sense, but so it's kind of, it's the planning, but also the overall atmosphere. I hope that makes sense. And it absolutely does change. Like the plot, of course, changes throughout each draft. Like I said, I am not afraid of just like tearing up, half the book and rewriting that bit. So I just think you have to be open to change. And then of course it helps when you have an editor, an agent who can, they can usually see what I'm trying to do and like also help me get there, like hold my hand a little bit and say, like, did you mean, I think this, we need to make more of this, or this needs to be more of a thing. And you think, oh yeah. Because sometimes what is very clear to you is way too subtle to someone who isn't inside your head, or the other way around.
Good. I've got more questions online. Jade, it's also a research-based question. It's very similar to Laura's actually, but she was actually focused on things like the witch trials. How did you research things like that? Was that the British Library as well?
Yeah, it was. Well, that was sort of with the Familiars. I had the idea, and obviously I'd never written a historical fiction book before, so I didn't really know. I was sort of starting from scratch. Didn't really know how to do it, where to begin. So I think I sort of did a mix of ordering some books about the general Lancashire witch trials. I came to it with a little knowledge, but by no means enough to fill a novel with or base anything on. Because I'm, as you can probably tell, from Lancashire. But I really was sort of finding my feet with that novel. So it was sort of a mixture of like just reading books at home, trying to like find things that I might want to use in the novel, and going to the British Library and really sort of get into the nitty gritty of like early 17th century life, how they lit candles before matches existed, and how they got from A to B before there were roads, and all those kinds of things that actually I had absolutely no idea about. So it was quite fun in that sense, because it was quite a free experience. I didn't have a book deal at that point. I didn't have an agent. It was just me sort of having a go and seeing if I could do this. So I feel like that was probably quite a lot longer than what I would usually spend now researching. I felt like and because I was working as well, it was sort of like a day or a couple of days a month in the British Library.
You brought us in on a good link to Geraldine Benson's question, which was it difficult to get published when you started out?
Yes, because my first novel was turned down by every agent that I submitted to.
Wow.
But for the right reasons.
I was lucky enough to interview Victoria Hislop this morning, and her book The Island was turned down by numerous or publishers. So don't worry, you're in good.
I never even made it to the publisher stage. The first novel that I wrote was sort of nothing like what I like to write now and what I do right now. It was sort of this contemporary set, sort of like family drama, but like actually just nothing happened in it. And I was very sort of lackadaisical about how I wrote it. I wrote it over quite a long time, just here and there, and didn't really plot it out. Didn't really have that sort of. So you hear a lot in publishing the term elevator pitch, which some people are quite cynical about, because of course, the argument is not every book needs a 1 or 2 line pitch, but for me, it's quite grounded and it's quite important for me to have that. So I like to work out what the book is about in 1 or 2 lines, like you would read on the back of the book, like the sort of thing that helps you, or the other way, decide not to buy a book. So I couldn't really come up with that for the first one. Sent it to about 10, 15 agents, didn't hear back from probably like 12 of them. And I did send it to my agent, Juliet Mushins, and she was the only one who got back to me and said, I think you're a really good writer, but this story is, I don't think I can sell this story. But when you write, whatever you write next, do send it to me. So I had that in my mind as a sort of like goal to do. So yeah, I think that's quite common though. I think plenty of writers have at least one book in their proverbial bottom drawer that they would rather die than have published.
Would you ever go back to it and have another go?
No, definitely not. I think I'm not saying that I wouldn't use anything from it. Like maybe not that. Maybe I would use the setting. Maybe I would use like a relationship, but like not. I wouldn't ever dust that off and think, right, let's have another go with this. Never. Yeah.
Very good. Keep questions in the audience coming. I've got more here, but I'm just going to keep an eye out.
There's a couple, Ben.
Oh, are there? Oh, let's go to the audience. Just here.
This isn't a highbrow question at all, but Fleetwood suffers from pregnancy sickness in the Familiars, and I wondered how you got it so right.
Oh gosh.
As someone who suffered from it, it was just spot on.
Oh, what's it called? Myanphasia. There's a name for it, isn't there?
I can't remember it.
Gravis.
Yeah.
Well, I've never been pregnant, so it's not from experience. I don't know, but I think probably just knowing pregnant people and hearing what it can be like. There was actually one of my first edits from my agent when I signed with Juliet was, there's too much body horror in this, there's too much vomiting, there's too much blood. So we definitely pulled that back a little bit. But thank you, that's a huge compliment. Yeah, it's not from experience.
An anonymous attendee, it picks on the sort of getting published in the first place. Great talk, thank you. How did you get started with your first novel? Did you do a novel writing course like Faber Academy? And I mean, we've touched on how hard it was to get an agent, but did you do any writing course? Were you part of the because I know there's a sort of debut 20 and debut 21 groups.
Yeah, and Curtis Brown. Yeah, I did not do anything. I didn't do any of that. I've never done a course.
You were a journalist, weren't you?
I'm a journalist. Yeah, I never studied creative writing, but I, from a young age, wanted to be a journalist. So I guess I think that certainly has helped me sort of hone my craft in a sense, because in journalism, you're only ever writing to word counts. You can't just write as much as you want. It has to fit the space. So you always have to think about whether you're getting all the information in there. Is it relevant? Have you got enough like quotes? Is the story flowing? Do you have all the facts? And each word has to sort of fight for its space on the page. And I think that does translate into how I write fiction, because I would describe myself as quite a, I guess, like economic writer in terms of like, I'm not one for like loads and loads of description or loads of internal monologue. It's quite like snappy. And if anything, I have when it comes to writing drafts, I usually more often than not underwrite than overwrite. I never really have a problem. I'm not one of these writers who writes like 150,000 words and has to lose half the book. In fact, my first drafts are usually like 80, 85, and then that's too thin. So I need to then go in and bulk everything up and work and like draw everything out a bit more. So yeah, writing space is, I think, a hangover of being a journalist. But no, I never, and I wouldn't say that I've ruled out a writing course. I mean, I wouldn't ever say that I would never take one. Like I still might decide that I want to do one, but it just came down to money for me. And I had some savings. I had like a small pot of savings, and it was either enough to take one of those courses, like the Faber courses or the Curtis Brown ones, or it was enough to go on a 2-month unpaid sabbatical from work. And I decided to do that and live off them, because I was looking into the courses and I thought I could do one of these, but it's an hour a week or whatever, 2 hours a week, but that doesn't actually solve the problem of when I'm going to write this novel. So I thought I would rather, I know it sounds cheesy, but like invest in my own time than pay for one of these courses. And I'm glad I did that, because, because I had that limitation in a sense. I thought I have to take this really seriously. I can't just mess about. If I'm taking 2 months off work, I have to write a first draft of this novel, otherwise it's never going to get written. So I did write the first draft of The Familiars in the 2 months that I took off work. And I think some people are a bit like, oh, about that, but it wasn't very good. And it probably doesn't even closely resemble what's been published, but that seems to be my tried and tested method. So I just sort of spill out this first draft without editing at all. Like I just plow on, don't look back, don't even look back at the last line. And and then I just do it over and over and over again.
But do you give it to your editor like in between?
The first draft I handed.
You do,
yeah, now. Yeah.
Lovely. I think there is a question in the...
Hello, Stacey. Lovely to see you again. When you came to talk about the familiars, you gave us the impression that the characters have become your close friends and you're going to find it hard to put them down. Do you feel the same about the characters in Mrs. England?
I always do feel like that. I do think about them, but they do kind of they do just exist in the story for me. So like, I don't really know what happens to them afterwards, because I do feel like, although it's quite sad really, because I spend like a good year to 15 months of my life with them, and then I leave them where I leave them. So yeah, and you go from dreaming about them and thinking about them all the time and spending all this time with them on the page, and you know, they say things that you then take out and you put them in. They do definitely take on lives of their own. And I know some people roll their eyes when they hear authors say this, but like sometimes what you had planned for a particular part of the story, once you get to know the character and you've written like 50,000 words of them by then, sometimes several times, you just think they wouldn't do that, you know. And there was a scene in Mrs. England where Ruby, I made her do something that she would not have done, so it had to come out because it just didn't feel believable to me. Therefore, it wouldn't have felt believable to you. Like, she is a real person to me. So I hope that like she has my characters in the world that I create has to feel absolutely believable to me for it to feel believable to you, and like to the point where the houses that I use as my settings, even though Gawthorpe Hall is of course real, like Hardcastle House, for instance, it's not a real place, but I know it. I can picture it in my mind as well as I can picture like my childhood home. I know what it smells like. I know what the quality of light is like. I know what type of flowers are on the table in the hall. Like, I can go there in my mind. And I think even if you don't get all that detail into the story, if you know it, then there's that sense of authority that you're bringing to the story that I think makes people trust in you as a writer.
Lovely. Emily asked a lovely question. Hi, Stacey. I used to work in a mill in Huddersfield, so I'm so excited to read Mrs. England. I was at your signing in Manchester, and you mentioned there was always random facts that you found out that weren't relevant to the story. What was your favourite from the research for this novel? Have you got any random facts?
Oh yeah, loads. So I'll go with the mill theme because of our lovely reader. So the character of Champion Great Rex, who is Mrs. England's grandfather, was a very rich industrialist, is based on, this is a very niche Yorkshire reference, but it's based on a real man called Titus Salt, who built Saltaire, the village, which has, at one point, it was the largest mill in the world. I think he had 8,000 workers there producing textiles in the Victorian era. And Titus Salt made his fortune from alpaca fur, hair, whatever you would call it, wool. Yeah, wool. And he basically was just, you know, an entrepreneurial genius who was working in Liverpool one day, and there was all these bags of alpaca wool piled up against this wall, and he said, "What's that?" And whoever it was he was working with said, "Oh, it's alpaca, like it's useless, you can't do anything with it." So he was like, "I'll buy it." So he bought it super cheap and ended up being like the richest man in the world because he found the use for alpaca wool. And he then brought in, the idea of this was just like something from a dream. So he built this huge palace, this mansion in Yorkshire called Crowness, which is, I've used that name in the book as well. And his grounds were just flooded with alpacas and llamas. And actually in Hebden, there was a few randomly alpacas near the house that I rented. There's something going on with Peruvian alpacas and West Yorkshire. There's this really quiet niche relationship. So that was just one of the things that
Nice. Random. Stacey Gorman, she early in the event, she was complimenting you on your gorgeous dress, Stacey.
Oh, thank you. It's Zara. I bought it the other day.
Did you? Well done. And on a similar theme, Stacey then asked the question: who designed the front, the book cover? She's clearly got a thing about design. It's gorgeous, just like the other books.
Oh, thank you so much. I wish I could take credit for the book covers. I can't, because I can't even draw a stick man. But we have the same wonderful illustrator for all the jackets. It's Lucy Cartwright who does my books, and I feel very, very lucky that I've sort of been partnered with her, because I just think she does the most gorgeous.
But the inside's amazing.
Illustration.
As well, isn't it? You've got the
so the inside is the sort of nursery scene,
and then
at the back it's sort of all just a bit off and a bit dark and a bit creepy.
So all copies going to be like that. They are.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. The end papers on all of them actually.
For everyone who's got books from this event, you're getting a sort of special limited edition signed version with bonus bits and pieces. But Donna, do you think you'll write a contemporary novel? Apologies if I don't know. Is there a contemporary novel in you?
I would never say never. I know that's a really annoying thing to say and hear. I would never say never. If I had the idea, absolutely. I just seem to keep getting, all my ideas seem to be set in the past. And I can't really say why that is, but I think what interests me about writing about past is I'm much more interested in the kind of limitations that were placed on women and the sort of space, the confined spaces that they had to move in. You know, like even, for instance, women were children's nurses for hundreds and hundreds of years before there was even a qualification for that. So I'm a lot more attracted to the limitations and constraints placed on women and how they navigate those spaces, rather than the sort of modern, although, you know, still a lot needs to change. We've still a long way to go. I also just really don't want to write anything that features like TikTok or WhatsApp or emails or anything like that. So I don't really like the idea of bringing technology into my novels. But if I had the idea, absolutely.
Brilliant. There's just enough time for another question if there is one. Otherwise, I'm going to hand back to Harriet. Hand back to Harriet just to give a sort of closing comment on the book. And Stacey, do you want to do any thank yous, or is there a kind of, remember this is a virtual event as well, so
yes, I just want to say thank you ever so much to all my readers and people buying the books and booksellers selling the books. Thank you for having me here tonight. I'm just so grateful to all of you for the support, and to my lovely editor Sophie and my publicist Eleanor in the front row and my husband over there for coming. And I feel like I'm at the BAFTAs or something, but just thank you. I feel very lucky to be able to do a physical live event as well. So thanks for having me.
No, our pleasure.
It's my one and only one. So
no, thank you. I mean, we're desperate, and actually, there's publishers are being very kind of cagey about live events at the moment. And,
it's understandable, really.
Exactly. So credit to Bonnier who took the.
They were willing to throw me to the wolves.
Well, to be fair to them, a few of them have come as well. So. But Harriet, can you give us?
Well, just thank you ever so much for coming. Happy Publication Day.
Thank you.
And enjoy the book, everyone. It's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you to all of you for coming and sitting here with masks on for an hour. I know that can't be easy, so I really appreciate that.
So basically, Stacey will come here and do any dedications. I know you've all got signed copies. There are one or two more copies if anyone wants more. And we're going to leave the virtual feed on if our virtual friends are feeling left out. So, but no, thank you all for coming along. The commitment to the audience because of the mask is a credit to you guys. So thank you very much. Thank you.